In 1984, a behavioral scientist at the University of Delaware pulled 10 years of records from a hospital in suburban Pennsylvania. Patients who had undergone the same surgery, in the same building, with the same medical team, had been leaving at different rates. The variable that predicted who recovered faster wasn't their age, their fitness, or the strength of their medication. It was whether the window beside their bed looked out onto a small stand of trees or onto a brick wall. His name was Roger Ulrich. The records went back to 1972. 2 wings, identical surgical floor, beds assigned essentially at random based on availability, meaning that for almost a decade the hospital had been running an experiment without knowing it. The surgery itself had been chosen for its consistency, gallbladder removal, common enough to give a large sample, standardized enough that recovery could be meaningfully compared across patients. Ulrich went through the files. He pulled the lengths of stay, the doses of strong pain medication requested, the notes from nursing staff. The patients who looked out at trees used less pain medication. They were discharged earlier. Their nursing notes were shorter. What Ulrich had stumbled on, and what the next 40 years of research would slowly unpack, is that the human system responds to certain environments in ways the system itself does not announce. The patient does not feel the window doing anything. There is no obvious sensation. And yet across years of records, something was happening. The question that took shape from this finding was deceptively simple. What is the system responding to, and what exactly does it do in response? In Ann Arbor, Michigan, in the early 1980s, 2 psychologists named Stephen and Rachel Kaplan were thinking about a particular kind of exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, something more specific. The depleted feeling that comes after long stretches of focused mental work. The way the mind becomes harder to point in a direction. The way small distractions become harder to filter. They proposed that what we call attention is not one thing but 2. There is the involuntary attention that pulls toward bright movement, unexpected sound, anything novel, a system shaped by a very long evolutionary history of needing to notice predators and food. And there is directed attention, the effortful focus that lets you read a difficult page, hold a complex thought, ignore the construction noise outside. The first system runs essentially for free. The second draws on a finite resource, use it for hours, and it depletes. The Kaplans called the resulting framework attention restoration theory. Its central claim was about recovery. Directed attention, depleted by sustained focused work, recovers in certain environments and not in others. Natural settings, leaves moving in wind, light shifting across water, the patterns of a meadow. Engage attention involuntarily, without taxing the directed system. The Kaplans called this soft fascination. Built environments, full of traffic and signage and the demand to filter all of it, do not provide it. 2 decades later, in 2008, a researcher named Marc Berman tested this. He gave participants a backwards digit span task, a precise measure of working memory. Then he sent them on a walk, half walk through an arboretum, half walk down a busy commercial street in downtown Ann Arbor. When they returned, the test was administered again. The arboretum group's scores had improved. The downtown groups had not. 7 years after Berman's paper, work at Stanford by Gregory Bratman took the question deeper. He wanted to know what was happening in the brain. Using fMRI scans taken before and after a 90-minute walk, he compared participants who'd walked through a quiet natural area to those who'd walked along a busy multi-lane road. The brain region he watched most closely was the subgenual prefrontal cortex. Earlier research had implicated this region in a specific kind of mental activity, the repetitive, self-focused, often negative thinking that psychology calls rumination, the mind returning over and over to the same loop. In Bratman's study, the nature group showed measurably decreased activity in this region after their walk, alongside reduced self-reported rumination. The urban group showed no such change. Taken together, the Kaplan framework, Berman's behavioral finding, and Bratman's neural data describe a single observation from 3 angles. Time in natural environments restores the cognitive capacity that built environments deplete, and the system does this without any conscious effort on the part of the person experiencing it. They walk, they look, the brain does the rest. What Bratman's data describes is a brain, but the body had been measured too, and the most systematic record of those measurements comes from Japan. In Japan, beginning in the early 1980s, a national agency began promoting what it called shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. The phrasing was deliberate, not hiking, not exercising. Bathing, being immersed in the atmosphere of a forest. The recommendation came alongside a research initiative. Japanese scientists wanted to know whether what their culture had long assumed, that time among trees was good for people, would show up in measurable physiological data. Over the next 3 decades, a group of researchers, Yoshifumi Miyazaki at Chiba University, Ching Li at Nippon Medical School, Bumjin Park in South Korea, built a body of evidence that has now been replicated across many studies. They measured cortisol levels in saliva, taken before and after time spent walking quietly in forest environments, then compared to matched urban environments. Cortisol, the hormone the body releases during stress, was consistently lower after forest exposure. They measured blood pressure, which dropped. They measured heart rate variability, a sensitive indicator of how readily the nervous system shifts between alertness and rest. In forests, variability increased. The body had moved toward parasympathetic dominance, the state physiology calls rest and digest. Some studies, particularly Ching Li's work, also reported elevated natural killer cell activity after multi-day forest exposures, with effects appearing to persist for days afterward. These findings are more variable across studies than the cortisol and heart rate data, and the proposed mechanism that compounds called phytoncides, released by trees as part of their own defenses, are responsible, remains under investigation. What is well established is the autonomic shift. What is less established is exactly which features of the environment produce it. One candidate is visual. The physicist Richard Taylor has spent years studying human responses to fractal patterns, the self-similar branching structures found throughout nature in coastlines, trees, clouds, river systems. His work suggests that human visual systems respond preferentially to fractal patterns within a specific mathematical range, with stress markers reducing when people view them. The same patterns appear in coastlines and by Taylor's analysis in the work of Jackson Pollock. Whatever the mechanism, the pattern is consistent. The autonomic nervous system shifts in these environments. It does so without conscious intervention. And the same shift does not occur in built environments, however clean or quiet they appear. There was still something the research had not separated. Every study so far had compared whole environments, a hospital with trees against a hospital with a wall, a forest path against a city sidewalk. Whole environments differ on dozens of variables simultaneously. Air quality, lighting, temperature, sound, the presence of other people. To know what is actually doing the work, you would have to strip the environments down. In a more recent set of studies, researchers have begun doing this. They have isolated sound. Participants are exposed to natural soundscapes, birdsong, water, wind in leaves, or to anthropogenic soundscapes, traffic, ventilation, distant voices, controlled for decibel level, same volume, same duration, only the kind of sound changes. The natural soundscapes produce measurable reductions in stress markers. The urban soundscapes do not. Even at moderate volumes, the kind of sound matters more than the quantity. There is something about anthropogenic sound, even quiet anthropogenic sound, that the nervous system continues to monitor. In every study described so far, natural environments are doing something to the human system. They restore attention, they lower cortisol, they quiet the rumination loop. The implicit framing is that nature offers a benefit, that it adds something. But the soundscape research makes a different reading possible. If even moderate neutral anthropogenic sound keeps the nervous system engaged, then what the earlier studies measured may not have been what nature gives. It may have been what built environments demand, and what natural environments allow the system to release. This is one interpretation. The studies produce comparisons between conditions, not absolute readings of a baseline state. Whether the human system's default is alertness or rest is itself an open question, but the reframe is consistent with everything the research has shown, and it is harder to dismiss once seen. This reading fits a population scale finding from 2019. Mathew White and colleagues at the University of Exeter, drawing on a sample of nearly 20,000 people across the United Kingdom, found that those who reported at least 2 hours per week in natural environments were significantly more likely to report good health and high well-being than those who reported none. Below 2 hours, no clear effect. Above it, the benefit plateaued. The data is correlational and cannot speak to causation, but the threshold structure is suggestive, a minimum dose required for the system to return to itself. There is sound around you right now that you're no longer consciously hearing. A ventilation system, traffic at some distance, the hum of electronics. Your nervous system is hearing them. It has been hearing them for as long as you have been in this space. What is your system doing right now that you cannot feel it doing? If the research that makes the unspoken visible matters to you, consider subscribing.